Thank you for coming. We founded the Old Parish Preservation Volunteers, a 501c3 corporation, a little more than a year ago. Our mission is to preserve the beauty of the Old Parish Cemetery and to promote an appreciation of its historic significance and its contemporary relevance. Old cemeteries are often a rich resource for understanding the wider aesthetic, economic, and sociological culture in America. They are virtually outdoor museums. During our first year, we have cleaned as well as repaired and reset many gravestones. We have offered tours, increased the number of hours the cemetery is open to the public, compiled and enhanced a database of those buried there, and updated the 1890 map of the burial ground. There is always more to learn, especially as the cemetery reflects the origins of the town of Norwood. Those buried in Old Parish are the founders of our community. Tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stone carvers or stone cutters of Old Parish. The men whose artistic work, created in the 18th and 19th centuries, can be seen anytime you visit. Gravestone carving was a craft tradition, and it remains an underappreciated and often overlooked art form. Harriet Merrifield Forbes pioneered the study of early American gravestones in a 1927 essay, which was reprinted in the 1967 book, Gravestones of Early New England. Forbes was followed by Ernest Caulfield, who produced a series of papers from 1951 to 1967, and then others followed. In 1977, the Association for Gravestone Studies was founded, and their annual journal, Markers, began publishing in 1980. More recent scholars include Vincent Luty and Laurel Gable, who continue to work and publish in the field, and James Blackowitz, whose monumental 2-volume study explores networks of carvers, apprentices, their lives, and their work. I have depended on all of these studies to tell the stories of some of the gravestone carvers whose work has been found so far in Norwood's Old Parish Cemetery. I say so far because every work session holds the potential for uncovering additional stones by known carvers, as well as the work of cutters previously undocumented in this burial ground. Every work day is an adventure. As you can imagine, not all stones have signatures, and many signatures are below ground. Scholars often identify artists through probate records, which indicate payments to carvers. They also identify an individual carver through the characteristics of his work. Each cutter has his own style and capability. All the stones I'm going to show you have been identified by an expert, not me, or there was a signature. The design elements examined in early stones are these. I love this stone. This is a stone that's in Old Parish. Double stone, clearly husband and wife. And if you will notice, the husband is a little bit bigger. He's a little bit taller. Yeah. So the design elements of these stones are the central arch, which is called a tympanum, the finial or shoulder, which is on the edge, which can be round or flat. The previous one, those were flat. You see those little shoulders are flat. The side border panel, if I had a thing, I'd point it. The tablet or transcription panel, which is the center where the lettering is, and the lettering itself. For many of these people who have been at this for years and years, they can virtually read the handwriting of the stone carvers, so they can identify just through the lettering. Materials also matter. Cutters worked with both slate and marble. Slate came first, and marble was not in common use until the end of the 1700s. Our burial ground for the second or south parish of Dedham was founded around 1740, while slate was still the predominant material. At that time, the fire and brimstone warnings of early Calvinist clergy were still prevalent. Remember, or maybe you don't, Reverend Thomas Balch, the first pastor of the parish, had been part of a score of what were called militant Protestant clergymen who traveled with colonial troops to Cape Breton to face down the Jesuits in 1745. These ministers were still inspiring rather foreboding and forbidding effigies of winged skulls and sometimes crossbones, depictions meant to warn of what comes next if you have not behaved yourself in life. Here's an early one from the old parish belonging to John Bullard from 1751. And here's one from Mary Morse, 1746, and a close-up of the arch or tympanum with the skull, the winged skull, and some crossbones there. You get the idea. Better watch out. As decades passed, these depictions slowly evolved into angels or generic faces with wings. Old Parish has examples of both types of 18th century carvings. Now, onto some carvers. Captain Samuel Fisher was born in 1732, and his shop was located in Wrentham on what is today's Route 140. According to Harriet Forbes, Fisher rarely departed from type once he settled on a design. In Old Parish, we have two stones identified as being carved entirely by Fisher, both from his early work when he was in his 20s, which used the winged skull depiction. The first is belonging to Benjamin Fairbanks from 1757, and you can see his, the skull there, and Judith Everett from 1758. Fisher died in 1816 at the age of 84. George Allen Jr. was born a decade later than Fisher in 1742 to George and Sarah Allen of Rehoboth. George Allen Sr. was a stonecutter, as was another son, Gabriel. George Allen Sr. had a virtual monopoly on stone carving in the Providence-Rehoboth area. The family's importance and creativity led to the establishment of a unique style that influenced many subsequent carvers. Vincent Ludi calls it the Narragansett Basin style, and it reflects the death imagery then common in New England: winged skulls, eventually charming cherubs, gentlemen and ladies, and fancy borders. George Jr. began carving at 16. He was very skilled and mastered a variety of styles. Only about 36 stones have been unquestionably attributed to George Allen Jr. An early death, he died at 22, prevented him from completing much work. In Old Parish, we have examples of both his winged skull and his cherub work. This first stone, carved at the death of Ezra Morris in 1760, is an example of his skull work. Allen's designs were distinctive. The double outlining between skull and wings, the round eyes, and the undercut jaw just below the teeth were all characteristics of his work. In case you were wondering, what it said on the transcription panel was, "Here lies buried the body of Captain Ezra Morse, who died October ye 17th, 1760, in ye 90th year of his age." Ezra Morse was fought in the colonial wars, and he was a deacon of the First Parish Church for about 24 years. Do you guys want to come in and sit? This room. The second stone, carved only a year later for William Bacon, is less ominous. Sort of handsome, in fact. Here is an angel sort of face. I really like this one. Whose impish, goofy mouth, other people called it that, not me, puffy eyes and lumpy nose are characteristic of Allen Jr.'s work. Also distinctive And I love the background, too, around the face. The wings are just great. Anyway, also distinctive is the side border panel of leafy vines in his work. Although George Allen Jr. died in 1764, a gravestone identified as by his hand memorializes Sarah Morse, who died in 1767. How is that possible, you ask? Gravestone carvers often had secondary occupations. It was always difficult to make a living at just gravestone carving. They prepared stones when they had the time, leaving the transcription panel blank to be filled in as needed. If the cutter himself died, as was the case here, then the text was inserted by another carver. So Sarah Morse's 1767 stone has the undercut jaw and border vine characteristic of George Allen Jr.'s carving. But according to experts, the lettering was probably done by Daniel Farrington, whose work can also be found in the Old Parish. Just as a little side note, Sarah Morse, who was the wife of Joseph Morse, according to the records, died having been at meetings. She dropped down dead soon after she got home. So that will teach her. Born in 1733 in Wrentham, Daniel Farrington was active in town affairs. He was a fence viewer, he was a constable, he was a warden, he was an assessor, in addition to gravestone carving. He had a workshop on South Street in Wrentham, today's Route 1, close by Samuel Fisher's shop. In fact, they were family. Farrington's sister was married to Fisher. Farrington's mature work begins in the late 1760s. He had a sure hand, and his work is refined and elegant in both design and lettering. He's sort of my favorite. Beginning in around 1770, he carved squint-eyed skulls and winged effigies with some relief carving etched into the wing feathers. So you want to really look at his wing feathers. There are several Farrington stones at Old Parish. Vincent Ludi has identified, at last count, 20 that are at Old Parish, including some of the following. Olive Fairbanks, which is this person, who died in 1777. And her inscription says, in memory of Olive, daughter of Mr. Benjamin and Mrs. Mary Fairbanks, died December 1st, 1777, in ye 11th year of her age. And then underneath he had written, in time of youth was I cut down, and here in dust do lie. Take warning all who this behold, for you must shortly die. Happy people. But I like that face. Azuba Gay, who died in 1773. See these wings? The wings have real dimension. Captain David Fairbanks, who died in 1776. He had been in the Revolutionary War around the 1775 to 6. Looking distinguished. And Anna Fairbanks, his widow, who died in 1785. You can really see his wings and how the relief makes them really sort of pop. I think they look sort of like bat wings. Anyway, you can see some of the detail on the wings and also on the side border panels. See how he's etched out the flowers, and there's some real relief work there. Farrington died in 1807. Both he and Samuel Fisher were said to be influenced by another carver, James Wilder. James Wilder was born in 1741, so just about the time the Old Parish was founded. He was the fourth of 7 children born to a prominent family in Lancaster, Massachusetts. The family happened to own land near a rich vein of distinctive slate. Apparently, James was his father's favorite son, and thus was allowed to choose his own occupation. In 1766, he acquired land near his father's property and set up a carver's shop, less than a mile from this slate quarry. Interestingly, the quarry was finally abandoned in 1971 by Bird and Son, who had used the slate in the production of roofing material for all those years. Wilder served in the Revolutionary War, but in the 1780s he ran into financial difficulties which caused him to sell off his land, and he died in poverty at the age of 53 in 1794. Gravestone scholar Laurel Gable has identified more than 200 Wilder-type stones in various cemeteries, but documentation is generally hard to come by. Wilder was known for 4 types of tympanum styles: skulls, a young face, a stylized face, and an older face. He also used a figure-8 flourish to fill blank space in his transcription panels when there wasn't a when he didn't fill it with words. At Old Parish, we have at least 2 stones carved by James Wilder. The best example is this one, the stone of Sarah Guild, the wife of Aaron Guild, the first wife of Aaron Guild, the first of 3 wives of Aaron Guild, who died at 21 in 1755. And it is an example of Wilder's young face with its tight curls. It's a really nice stone. And the Wilder figure-8 flourish is also visible. In case you're wondering and doing fast math, someone who began carving in the 1760s, how could they have produced a stone for someone who died in 1755, you ask? Many stones were erected later, sometimes years later, after the death occurred. So there's also that kind of gap when you're identifying stones. These winged faces eventually gave way to the more secular neoclassical symbols of urns and willows as the 1700s ended and the 19th century began. Inspired by a lightening of the mood of the Puritan sensibility, people began to believe there might be salvation for us all, as well as an attempt or a desire to be modern. These stones began to acknowledge the grief experienced by those left behind. The depictions of urns and weeping willows were more about mourning and grief than either the skulls or the winged faces. Between 1800 and 1815, interesting experiments took place as carvers bridged the gap between designs, cherubs and urns, and also materials. The slate and marble was becoming transition. So just as the styles of art shifted, so too did the material of gravestones change with the times. This next generation of carvers included Coomer Sol II. Coomer Sol II was born in 1777, so we'll see this a whole new generation here, into a stone carving family. Both his father, Beza, and his grandfather, Ebenezer, were stonecutters. Jim Blackowitz has identified 21 stone carvers in 5 generations of the Sol family, spanning some 200 years. Coomer was born in Plimpton, Massachusetts, and learned to carve from his father. Around 1799, he moved to Vermont, then returned to Massachusetts in 1803. He married and had 7 children with his wife, Nancy Cady. Between 1810 and 1826, he likely spent time in Quincy or in the Canton-Stoughton area, since most of his stones, which are found locally, were carved during that time period. In Canton, there are at least 19 stones by Sol. In Stoughton, there are 14. In Sharon, there are 22. And in Old Parish, there are 7. Those in Old Parish include this one of Joel Everett, who died in 1810. This is a little lighter, but you can see the urn and willow. And also Eliphalet Fisher, who died in 1819 in the same urn. His willows have this sort of distinctive shape in the positioning of the leaves. You can kind of see that. They're kind of like, I think the other one's better. See how those leaves sort of look like bird scratching, bird feet or something to me. But. Now, these final three carvers and their stones involve discoveries made during our first year at Old Parish. First, Alpheus Carey and the Charles Pond stone. Born in Quincy in 1788, Carey advertised as a stonecutter in Boston directories beginning in 1810, and his ads remain in directories at least until 1852. For a time, he partnered with a David Dickinson, at least until 1817, and developed a large upper-class clientele. Carey was one of the original proprietors of Mount Auburn Cemetery in 1831, and has many signed stones there. When he died in Boston on January 2nd, 1869, at the age of 80, his obituary stated, quote, "Almost every burial place in New England contains some articles of his workmanship. His correct taste and good judgment aid much in the adorning of cemeteries," close quote. Carey is placed in a category somewhat above mere stone cutting. He was the stonemason for the construction of St. Paul's Church on Tremont Street in Boston, and he supplied the marble tablet for the John and Abigail Adams Monument erected in Quincy's United First Parish Church. His gravestone designs varied from plain lettering to willow and urn to sometimes elaborate tympanum scenes. He used both slate and the more modern marble markers. Carey set the standard for the new age of stone cutting with his unique combination of artistic talent and business acumen. The discovery of this previously unknown Alpheus Carey stone came about as our volunteers repaired and reset the broken and half-toppled stone of Charles T. Pond, who had died in 1846. It is a simple, elegant stone of marble in what is known as a two-way tablet style. As volunteers lifted the bottom section of the stone from the ground, Carey's signature was revealed once it was cleaned off. Remember that?
Is that the normal place to sign?
On the bottom.
Bottom center?
Well, bottom, but some of them are over on the right, yeah. Which is why they're all underground.
Interesting.
And then here's the stone repaired and reset. So you can see the sort of shape of where it had been underground, where the signature was, where it was broken in two and glued back together and reset in its base. Two more carvers, each born in the early 19th century, are also represented in Old Parish. And like the Alpheus Carey stone, our volunteers made these identifications this past year. The first is Michael Gallagher. Here's his signature over to the right. Gallagher was born in County Longford in Ireland in 1813 and emigrated to America in 1828. He became a U.S. citizen, married Mary Ann McCardle of Boston, and settled in Canton in 1840. He likely learned his trade around 1831 at 18 years old from a Lewis Johnson. Gallagher was a productive and successful carver and advertised in the Norfolk Democrat. According to Huntoon's History of Canton, Gallagher and his wife kept the toll gate on what is now Route 138 for some time. Again, a second occupation. They eventually moved to a house on Washington Street across from today's Canton High School. The 1850 census shows a household that included his wife and 3 children, Anne, Matilda, and Augusta, and 6 young men, all marble cutters, living in the same household, all born in Ireland, all between the ages of 19 and 30, most of them Gallaghers and McCardles. But it was a full house. When I found that Gallagher had worked and lived in Canton, I contacted the Canton Historical Society and was able to add a few interesting tidbits to his story. The Canton Historical Society has a collection of letters written among the Endicott family. They were neighbors of Gallagher's in Canton, and he carved at least 1 stone for them. Some of the family lived or moved for a time to New York, which is why they were writing to each other, and they still have all the letters. One letter indicates that Mr. Gallagher had traveled to Sing Sing, New York, to obtain stone for his work. This was in 1847. And the reason that that came up in the letter was that Mrs. Endicott had written that had she known Mr. Gallagher was going to Sing Sing, she would have sent the letter with him instead of putting it in the mail, I guess. Another letter indicated that he had built a windmill at the end of his shop to split and grind stones, which I thought was really interesting. So Gallagher worked in both slate and marble. Marble is the stone that he would have found in New York, up near Sing Sing Prison, which is made of the marble and all of that. There are several Gallagher signed stones in Old Parish, including this double stone of Elizabeth and Jonathan Dean, which was erected long after their deaths by their sons, Ebenezer and Balch Dean. And you can see his signature on that one. But while cleaning the stones last year, volunteers found a few more Gallagher signed stones that had not been recorded previously. Here are 2. Olive Bullard from 1843 and Elizabeth Bullard from 1841. So better look at the central arch. Gallagher's willows have a more complex internal branching, which is distinctive, and his urns have little scallops cut on a crest-shaped interior design, which you can see pretty well on that. Some of his urn designs have narrower pedestals than that, and I think going back to Olive, that it's not very visible, but it's a more narrow urn. As noted, Michael Gallagher also worked in marble, and his signature was uncovered while resetting the stones of Deborah and Samuel Dean. Each stone is a simple marble rectangular tablet. Samuel Dean's stone, like the double stone of Elizabeth and Jonathan Dean, was completed later, probably to match Deborah's. There's Deborah's. Samuel died in 1823, and Deborah died in 1847, but their stones match. Records indicate that Gallagher completed at least 237 stones scattered in cemeteries throughout the area between 1833 and 1854. Michael Gallagher died in 1855. The Canton letters shed a little more light on this as well. In November of 1847, Jane Endicott wrote to a family member that Mr. Gallagher had been inspired by a Mr. Chapin to give up alcohol. But in 1851, she noted in another letter that Gallagher had participated in a drunken frolic at the Massapog House, a nearby tavern. So I guess he had a relapse. In his defense, the couple had lost twin sons that same year. They had lived only one day. Sadly, when he died 4 years later, the cause of death was listed as intemperance. He was 42 years old. He is buried in Canton Corner Cemetery along with another son, Michael Thomas, who had died in 1847 at the age of 6. And there's Gallagher's stone in Canton Corner Cemetery. Clearly, he was not a practicing Catholic, or he would have been across the street in St. Mary's, or whatever that parish cemetery is. Canton Historical Society, said to me, it's right along the Washington Street, you can't miss it. Well, you could have. And all of our volunteers are thinking the same thing, which is that could use some D2.
Yeah.
Finally, we have a gravestone carved by Hiram Johnson. Johnson, born in 1832, appears in the 1850 U.S. Census in Malden with an occupation of marble manufacturer. And by the 1855 Mass Census, he is living in Stoughton in the household of his father, Holman Johnson, a bootmaker, where Hiram is listed as a marble worker. Johnson married Sarah Pitts Swan in 1856. They had 2 children, Wallace and Charles. In 1865, the family moved to Illinois, where Hiram became a merchant. He died in Galesburg, Illinois in 1921, 20th century, at the age of 88. So there are a few stones because he really didn't carve stones for too long. There are a few stones in Stoughton and Westwood cemeteries that have been identified as being the work of Johnson. In Old Parish, again, while repairing and resetting the stone of Fanny G. Pond, who died in 1855, our volunteers found Johnson's signature. So here it is getting ready to be glued back together. Although the stone broke right along the signature line, it's still decipherable. And the distinctive raised lettering on this stone is like that seen on another of Johnson's carvings in Stoughton. So this stone and also the Alpheus Carey stone had not been recorded at all in Jim Blankowitz's large book, so he was very glad to get that, to add to his database, which is immense. So this is just a sampling of the work of the stonecutters of Old Parish, just 8 of them. Men who between the 1740s and the 1850s carved the skulls, effigies, urns, and willows, along with the transcription panels and the side borders on the slate and marble stones found in the cemetery. Later this month, Old Parish Preservation volunteers will begin our 2nd year of work at Old Parish. In addition to the satisfaction we get from preserving this most ancient historic site, I have no doubt there are more discoveries to be made. We hope you can join us. Thank you. If you have any questions about our work or activities, we'll be glad to answer them. Yes?
During the period when they were angels, I noticed some slight variations in hairstyles. The first one you showed was the only one to have long, straight hair. And most of the rest had curls, but there was one that had sort of a flip. And I'm wondering whether there was anything about that that was related to the art style or the carver or the characteristics of the deceiver.
Well, there was an article, I was trying to get back to the, yeah, see those curls?
Here's the flip.
Yeah.
The flip? Well, that's David Fairbanks. That's his, that's his, his wig.
Oh, it's a wig, okay.
That George Washington look?
Yeah.
Yeah. There was an article written, and it was sort of, tongue-in-cheek, by Wynne Everett in around 1934, where he was trying to attribute these to what the people were like. They didn't do that, because they made the stones when they had the time. So they might have, as I noted, a young face, a man, a woman, an older face, but they couldn't get them down to the, what do they look like exactly? Yeah, that's a good one.
Most of the stones that were broken, is it vandalism or just weathering and stuff?
I think most of it was weathering, actually.
Here's another thing we discovered when we started doing the work, because vandalism, as you know, we read about it almost every day. The first recording we could find of vandalism on our Old Parish Cemetery was in 1929 by kids drinking. And it's all written up in the town report.
A drunken
and
frolic,
with a
as it
picture
were.
of the stones that were toppled and what they were petting and drinking.
Yes, they were.
Was the words they used in the, so I always like
Both.
to say, this greatest generation, they were raising hell, okay? And I think that tradition carried through to probably today up by the cemetery, so. There has been vandalism. Unfortunately, was it 69 they finally put a fence up?
Yeah, we're in the 60s. But there really aren't too many. It's mostly, you can
Yeah.
tell, it's mostly weathered. Rob could talk about Medfield. I remember some of yours in Medfield, they were like broken into pieces. Knock on wood, we haven't found any of those. And those were probably vandalism, but we haven't found any that were really attacked, hopefully.
What's the current grave in there?
1950s.
Yeah, that's another, everybody should be aware, it's not an active cemetery any longer and hasn't been since the 50s. Somebody asked us the other night about, should we really be in there tampering with the graves? No, it's an outdoor museum. We're in there caring for these museum pieces that, and when you look at this, think about it, that's over 200 years old and we can easily read that. It's weathered and stood there for that long. The slate ones don't even have the cleaning that we have to do on the marble.
Yeah, some of them are really, really handsome, yeah.
How do you clean them?
There's a special solution that Rob, our mentor, gave us. It's called D2, and it's a bio-friendly solution, doesn't harm the vegetation. You wet the stone with water. You do this solution half and half, you dilute the solution, half water and half solution. You spray it on, let it set for maybe 10 minutes, and lichen just melts off. It's really easy to take off. And you spray it with water again, and then sometimes we'll spray it with solution at the end of the day and just let nature, rainwater will rinse it in sunlight, and the white just pops.
The picture that you see on the handout in the little magnet, John took after
those
we had cleaned those
stones were
stones.
gray.
Yeah.
They were literally gray with mildew, and now, you can ask these people, there's probably 8 or 9 of you sitting here who've worked on these stones, and you come back next week, you work on it Saturday, you come back the next Saturday, you won't believe it looks like a brand new stone's been put up.
Vic?
It's really, it's a kind of,
outdoor museum,
Yeah.
but it's perpetually closed. Is there any opportunity for it to open on weekends?
I don't know.
So get going.
I mean,
well, the one good thing is, and you'll see on your handout on the right side there, every date there, we're there working, you can come by and walk through and spend time in the cemetery.
It'd be nice to know that it'd be open from
Yeah.
10 to 4 on a Saturday, every Saturday or something.
That could happen.
Is it okay to take pictures?
yes. Yeah. You could go up to Highland, Vic. They're open.
Yeah, but that's so much more interesting.
It is. It really is interesting.
It really is.
Yeah.
How many stones in total?
It's cold.
How many stones in total?
Oh.
253.
Yeah, it's rough, but here's the other thing, we don't know what we don't know. I mean, people are buried there that never had a stone. You weren't compelled
Sure.
to put a stone up.
Well, and also there are certainly several stones that are at lots where there are several people there, and it's the family plot. So,
And some were buried too. A couple of the stones were buried.
right.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, yep. Yeah, but that was part of the putting the database together and also updating the map, which we don't have. I didn't bring the map, but thanks to John Anderson, he helped me. He put all the numbers in. But we went through and recorded all of the stones that were there. And I think there were 121 that were on the 1890 map, and then they just had made note of veterans up on the hill, which is where the oldest stones are, and they had no markings for all of the people who were beside the veterans. So we've got those on the map now, so I think it's like 253, something like that. Yeah.
Do you know what a carver would charge for a beautiful stone like that?
Can't afford it.
It depends on when it was.
Yeah, it probably would depend on when. Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm sure that some of those experts that I mentioned, who went through all the probate records, they found what it cost, obviously, if they were charging, but
Because some
yeah,
of them
no.
have a nice saying on the bottom. Some don't.
Right. I don't know if they charge by the letter or any of that either, yeah.
Gallagher may know.
Gallagher, yeah. Yes.
Hey, I was down there with you and the volunteers on the 4th of July.
Yep.
And I think someone of you said that when they opened Highland Cemetery, people decided they didn't want anything to do with their people being in the old cemetery. They dug them up and moved them.
Yes.
When they did that, did they take the stones?
Yes. Yes.
So there should be some old stones?
There are old stones up there. That's one of the things we plan on doing is identifying all of them, getting those cleaned, and we can probably give a tour of those people who, moved on up. But there are, in particular, the Winslow graves, the Smith, the Day, Foggs. There are empty lots at Old Parish because they moved them up to Highland.
A general question. When did cement liners come into play? And if it were Massachusetts, is it a law in Mass or is it a law everywhere, or do you know?
I think that's just a town ordinance, so the ground zone, so I think it's up to the town. A lot of towns don't even use coffins anymore, they just put them in cardboard boxes.
Well, and it depends, if there's a natural gravestone or a section of the cemetery that is green, but we don't have any of those right now in Norwood. We don't have a green area. I think it was the 20th century though, for the liners. Yeah.
With the stone carvers, was that a full-time profession, or was that just something that we do?
Well, that might have been their profession, but most of them didn't make a living at it, so they had these other jobs that they picked up, like the guy who was the surveyor or the assessor and the toll gate watcher and those sorts of things, because I was going to say, there really weren't a lot of people. But yeah, so that, it was not a full-time kind of job.
What was the old parish church?
Well, that's a really good question. The Old Parish Church was nowhere near the Old Parish Cemetery. The church was kind of where we are now. It was right in this neighborhood, the first one. Then it moved to the second one, I think it's on Lenox, and then it bounced around. The third one was back here, next door to the library, and now that's the fourth, I think, where it is now. It's a congregational church. Yep.
And so if you've driven by down Central Street, which is the street that goes in front of Norwood Theater, you cross Manhattan, you cross Railroad Ave, and that street continues, and it ends at the cemetery, at the back Railroad Avenue. That was originally called Cemetery Street. So on all the pre-1900 maps, you'll see that as Cemetery Street. Once they redesigned Norwood Center and built the Common, they rerouted Cemetery, what would have gone diagonally across the Common up to Washington Street. Now it's called Central Street. So we're kind of pushing the town to call that little street from Railroad Ave up to the gate of the cemetery, Cemetery Street.
Well, it is Cemetery Street.
Because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And it is still a public street in Norwood.
Yeah. But usually, when you think of these old cemeteries, they were right next door to the church.
Right.
But it never was, it wasn't next door to the church. And I've often thought it was just because this guy who had this rocky piece of land couldn't farm it, and he said, I'll give you that, because he gave it to them, so, yeah.
Are you finding there's more deterioration in certain types of stones than others? For example, I've seen in some cemeteries, the marble stones seem to have taken a really bad hit from acid rain.
Yes, they're much softer
Nice.
than the slate, yeah. I mean, you could tell, even the few marble ones that I had here, you could tell, like the Deans, it's, and a lot of until you get the D2, it helps, but still a lot of the writing, the lettering is worn away on the marble. Where the slate, some of it is just sharp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What percentage of this cemetery/museum are you happy with identifying, cleaning?
What do you mean? I'm happy with all of it, but
Meaning what work
How much?
have you done Are you like, oh God, we're 50% done?
Oh, no.
We're
Ask
20%
these
done?
guys, they'll tell you, I mean, we started at the Washington Street gate and kind of worked back simply because for visual impact, for people to look
Yeah.
at it, that they come and say, wow, look how clean those stones look.
So you can't get in?
Maybe we're 25% into the cemetery.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say.
I was
Yeah.
hopeful that it'd be like 7 to 8.
No.
Oh, no, 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 no.
And, but I,
We just
that's why we're
started.
anxious to
It
get
was just
going
1
again
year.
this spring.
Well, I mean,
because-
you know, we have like five work mornings, it's 2 hours, so like maybe 5 in the spring, 5 in the fall. That's a lot
Wow.
So it,
to have, and some of them need to be, like the few picked up, reset, glued back together.
How could people sign up to help?
Just show up,
Board right there.
sign on the clipboard, and then we'll let you know. And
Oh, you signed it.
and it's on the sheet that you have
Yes,
there,
and there's a
the dates are on
website-
there.
There's a website.
And he'll send out a reminder before the work days
You
and
can
say,
go to the website whenever you want and look at the, oh, good, they're working this Saturday, or if we have to cancel. I don't think.
we
ever
never
canceled.
canceled.
We had a October
Oh, no,
rain
no,
day.
no, we did not cancel in the rain.
It
These
was
people showed up.
misty and rainy, and we're standing there thinking, nobody's gonna show up. And
And-
lo and behold, by 8:30, we had a crew of like 10 people there, and we were in our ponchos, and
Wow.
it was really fun, but,
It was?
yeah. it was-
Yeah. It
It's
was,
fun for me
I don't
taking the
remember that
pictures.
part of it.
yes.
I'm wondering if anybody in the group is interested in pursuing other details about the stonecutters themselves. And not just what stones they've done and styles and such. You mentioned several who seem to have gotten into the business because it was a family tradition. I'd be
The Souls in
interested
particular,
how
yeah.
The ones who got into it without that background, what drew them to it,
Yeah.
what kind of network were
I know. Well, Jim, and I'm probably absolutely murdering his name, Blackowitz. These books are the most gorgeous books you have ever seen. They're like this big, and they have gorgeous photographs of all these stones. And he's done tons of research about the carvers. The library should get them. But yeah, you know, that's a rabbit hole that I'm trying to resist going down.
The other accomplishment we did get with the database she's referring to, I don't know if any of you are familiar with findagrave.com.
Yes.
We now have our updated database from 2018 uploaded on there. So, and we've merged it with other people who've contributed over the years, and like finding these new stone carvers, we put that in Find a Grave, just so you can, so there's ways to track it. If you're not gone to it, it's really interesting, you'll get hooked, because you can just put in Old Parish Cemetery, Norwood, Massachusetts, and it'll come up, and then you put in somebody's last name, and you can see what we know about them. Now, it's never done. Those databases are never done, because we will discover a stone, like somebody said, that was totally buried, and we've realized, oh, here's a stone. We didn't know this person was here.
Well, part of the problem was, so as long as we're telling our story, part of the problem was around 1850, when the railroad went through. It came to, according to Fred Day, who was a terrific local historian, it came too close to the cemetery. The cemetery went all the way to the railroad tracks. And shortly after the railroad went through, there was a terrible rainstorm and washed away part of the cemetery, never to be heard from again. So we're not clear, and he, you know, made mention, he was looking for particular Revolutionary War veterans, and he said, I know they were buried there, can't find them, probably all washed away. So there are some that were, you know, that are lost forever. Yeah.
I noticed that the stones at the beginning of the lecture, the older ones, were much more elaborate than the. Is
Yeah.
there any?
Sure, that's part of that whole sort of change.
Well, I know the motifs changed, but I mean, the later people just seem to do the lettering.
Just the lettering,
Not
yep.
the artwork.
Yep,
And I
yep.
was wondering,
Well, it's sort of,
I mean, I know it's more expensive to do the,
yeah, but I think it also was a change in style.
okay.
You know, by the mid-1800s, they became plainer and, you know, less fancy. If you go through any cemetery, they go through these styles of,
Yeah,
and that was one of them, yeah. They're not as much fun to look at, but
no.
I find it fascinating that they didn't even carve the month January.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you abbreviate a
Right there.
word so short?
That's how they did it.
But good for them, because it all fits, you know.
And that may be part of it.
Any by the letter.
Or maybe part of, how's it going to look
Yeah.
on the transcription
They did that
panel?
on more than gravestones back then.
Sure, yeah.
I
A
mean,
lot
I
of the
think I've
official
seen
records were
things.
abbreviated
Yes.
in
Yeah,
funny ways.
right. And then we have some that have, really elaborate, not just the, I'm turning to dust and so will you, but some elaborate poems or whatever on them.
Do these
Epigraphs.
books that you were talking about have pictures of the tools? Type of-
Some of them, yeah, some of them do. Yeah,
Two questions. Do you have any by Burt of Wisconsin?
yes. Burt, B-U-R-T? Yep.
On a stone like that, is very smooth on the face. Has that been polished or is that natural?
Well, they would have probably had the stone carver made it smooth. Yeah, but, it's not hiding the, some of them. Yes, Burt was a business. I cut off at Burt because when Burt started, it starts to become more of a big business than just a stone carver carving in his shop. But we have come across a few, Burt. Yeah.
And I'm sure we're going to find more. I mean, like she said, that soil line is so often, the stone has subsistence and has covered up that signature if it's there.
Generally, the signature would have been.
Would have been at the bottom.
Ground,
correct.
And it's gone down.
So, there's been
Soil's
leaves
come up.
fall and deteriorate, so.
But then some
it's
of
the
them like
ones- yeah,
that,
you can
it's
hear-
really
here's
up
one where
high
You can see all the way to the bottom, but.
and still
It just
standing
depends on-
straight.
And the
That's
other
the
thing,
ledge it's on there, right?
we also noticed that sometimes the damage got done by falling limbs off a tree.
Sure.
That hit a stone just right and snapped it, and so.
Or it was too heavy for the base that it was in, and it sort of sagged.
And in the original parcel of land they called it Sandy Hill.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, and if you go in the Norwood Depot parking lot and look up the cemetery, you'll see the MBTA has a huge retaining wall there holding that side of the hill back. But even today, we've walked around there in November, December, and that back side, it is literally, you can watch it erode down. It's when it rains, that water is running off down there rapidly. So in 1850 and again in 1885, they had those deluges that took stuff down. And I think, it was a big draw to put the railroad into Norwood in 1849. Nobody was going to prevent that from happening. So what if we had to take some land from the cemetery? Who cares? We need the railroad.
Well, but they didn't take the land, they just
Well,
went too close.
I'm sure
Wasn't their intent.
they got the right of way to come through. So
Yeah.
it just wasn't, when the damage happened, it was just, we got to get it back from the railroad. We don't want anything to impact the trains from coming through. So I'm sure they pushed soil back and put a wall up and said, hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Does the town of Norwood have a contingency plan for if the erosion continues to where we could all imagine what would happen?
Well, we're working on that, yes. The cemetery department is working with us, and they've cleaned out brush, and we've actually, found or uncovered some of the vaults that we knew were there, but, had been. But right now, we're also working with a landscape architect who would know and could give us suggestions on how to, retain.
Yeah, because I've seen the retaining wall, calling it a retaining wall is a compliment. My insurance company is that building there, and I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
That could all just come down.
And that retaining wall's
That was-
relatively new.
Wow.
It's only like, 20 years maybe that's been up there? At Norwood
You
Depot?
mean at the
The new, the front one,
The
part of
front
the parking lot.
one? Yeah. The one inside.
The one
was
inside, that's
1880.
a retaining wall from before, but the
From
newer
1880.
one.
Because there are two walls.
Yeah.
At least,
Yeah,
yeah.
at least, we may see other things. And it's really steep between, I tried to walk around there last summer, and it's kind of like, wow, because I thought I'm going to find.
It's no man's land, yeah.
It's so sad.
Is there any scripture on any of the stones, or did that not happen in the 1800s?
Not really scripture, just the epitaphs of,
Yeah, oddly enough, there's not even any, there's only one or two that have a Christian cross on it. Maybe just two. There's some, that we at least have one Mason and six.
well, we have some 20th century stones that may.
Yeah, but oddly enough, it's the motif that were prominent in that day.
Yeah, but it might not be that odd because they were considered the cross to be a
Sure.
symbol.
Yeah,
And most of these people
Right,
were
yep,
Protestants of the Reverend Walsh.
right,
Yeah.
right. Yep, yes.
I'm thinking of the grave sites that were moved to Highland,
Yes.
and I'm puzzled. How could a body that was buried 100 years previous, when they didn't have vaults and
It's something to ponder. Yeah. He said of the bodies that were moved to Highland, he was thinking about bodies that had been there for 100 years or more. How'd that work? Well, they did the best they could. And some of them weren't that old. You know, they may have died in the 1850s. They moved them in somewhere between 1880 and 1900, 1901, 1902. You know, when they were building up Highland and they wanted the, you know, families. So some of them probably weren't that old. There are some there's some plot plans that the cemetery has from years ago. And then we were thinking of the washaway thing. And there are some designations or mark-offs within some of these plots that just say old folks' remains. So we're thinking that may have been part of the cleanup.
A reinterment.
Yes, reinterment after the floods or something. But, yeah. But they were clearly removed. I mean, the records say removed. Removed to Highland, removed to, you know, New Cemetery.
If you walk around Highland and see a stone that says died 1876.
Or
most likely
1853.
That was moved from.
Because Highland didn't open until 1880.
Yeah.
Have you
Yes.
always liked history, or was there an event that made you get involved with this, if you don't mind me asking?
Me? Yes, no, I've always liked history, always. And Norwood history in particular. Yeah.
Good stuff.
It is good stuff.
Well, the neat thing about this, and we've had some people here tonight, and a lot of people live in Norwich. They don't know where this is. You gotta kind of tell them. And
Well, it's hidden. It's really hidden.
Back there. Okay.
Which is why it's not open all the time, Vic.
It's too hidden.
It's hidden.
I used to think it was very funny that there was at one time a medical center directly in front of the cemetery.
Yes.
So that if they made a mistake, they could go to the back door. But
Did they have it back there?
relevant to the question about identifying the skeletons, City of Boston Archaeology Project has been digging up several skeletons in various places around the city where they were pretty much informal burials. And they are trying to identify them based on the places, but they still have enough of the skeleton left to be able to put the thing back together again.
We're not doing that.
I can dig it out for you. Here you go.
Yes.
You're only working above ground.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence of segregation by religion or anything like that in this cemetery like you find in many other cemeteries, including the Highland Cemetery?
Well, yeah, the Highland Cemetery clearly had, when it was founded in 1880, there was the Protestant side, and then in 1888 they decided there was money to be made, and they opened a Catholic side. That's a very unusual thing for a public cemetery at that time. Everybody was going to parish cemeteries. And even, I think it was 1906 or 7, Walpole opened, the Sacred Heart or whatever that church, opened a parish cemetery. But from 1888, Norwood residents had that option, which is really quite liberal. Down here, you see it was the old parish. First, it was the first parish. It was a very homogeneous settlement, so everybody belonged to that church. Around 1827, the younger people decided that fire and brimstone was a little too much, and they broke off and formed the Universalist Society. And then there were some Baptists. So by that time, they sort of let all three of those guys. There aren't any Catholics in there.
The Irish hadn't come yet.
They had not come yet. And there may be some. And when they died, they went to Canton. That's where either Canton or Roxbury, where there were parish cemeteries, is where. I mean, all of my old relatives are in Canton until 1888, when it was possible to have Highland. So there are definitely, but I've never noted whether they were in different segments yet of the cemetery, and I think probably not. There were just not that many families to really segregate. And when they split off, some branches of certain families split off to Universalism, and some stayed in the first church. So even within families, there was that sort of schism. And that was pretty nasty at the time, but
How do you
they
generate
got over
funds?
it. Donations,
Do you need more money?
yes. Yes,
Who owns the cemetery?
the town.
And does that mean that your activities are in some sense answerable to DPW?
Yes, we work with Mark Ryan and Paul Rinaldi. He's the cemetery foreman.
We are in the first year of the Community Preservation Act.
Yes, we know.
And toward the end, you were talking about what sounded like a larger, more elaborate, more expensive project. And I would definitely think about putting
Thanks.
that in.
Yes.
We are gathering our credentials for that application as we speak.
Part of doing that, I think, is if you don't already have a connection to the Historical Commission, they are our leaders on identifying preservation-worthy projects, and I would get in touch with them. Tony Esco is about to become the representative.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
I've gone to the website to see the application process, and one of the, and I don't even tell you this, you know, but you've got to show that the community's in support of this effort, which our past year, we were kind of going into this like, does anybody care about this but us? And then next thing you know, we've got 15 people showing up every Saturday. So we know we got this community support. We've got the public schools working with us now. Nick's going to work with an Eagle Scout on his Eagle project in the cemetery. So we're building all this community base of support for our application to show that it hits us on, it hits community historic preservation, it hits on green space within the city, within the town of Norwood.
There are, besides myself, there are a number of people who are on the committee, or like Mr. Leach, have recently been involved with projects put into the committee, who could talk to you folks. It sounds to me like you may think the bar is higher than it really is. I think
we just want to do it right.
Do we have that on tape?
I think you would be very optimistic about.
I think we're going to be able to earn it.
Oh, yeah.
We want to go in with Because, you know, when we first started, everybody had, oh, you need to take that chain link fence down. Oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. Wait a minute, folks. Let's plan it. Let's just don't do whatever's fresh on everybody's mind and regret it 10 years later.
Right, so the landscape architect is what we want to pay for them to do the
To tell
the real
us
survey
how
of.
our cemeteries maintaining and preserving
Right.
their space in this little postage stamp plot we have.
Well, you mentioned the
Just for those
chain
who,
link fence.
you see
and I
that,
also talked to the
that
neighbors.
granite area, that's an area where people moved their stones up. See that?
See those
Yeah.
basically empty.
The front one, those were children, mostly the Comey children, and those little stones are still there, but that other one was, I think it's Martin Winslow, and they were moved.
I want to compliment the volunteers on the quality and the care of the work that you're doing. It's really quite impressive, and it's really a lot of work. So, well done.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good place to end it. Thank you for
Stop
coming.
by on a Saturday.